it's Jordan. Welcome back to part 2 of my bulk cooking. Today I'm really going to focus on what foods that I was able to make ahead and fill my freezer with. So let me talk a little bit about bakery items because I love to bake ahead of time so that we can still have good, nutritious food that isn't processed so much on days when I just don't have time to cook. So one of the examples is I love making these little peanut butter protein bites. One of the things that I have done is I made these ahead of time, and here's a little tip for when you're cooking things to put into a container. For example, I made all of these protein bites into little balls, but I did not put them directly. I did not put those balls directly into this container because then they would all kind of freeze together into one massive chunk, and you don't want to go reach over in your freezer thinking you only need 2 or 3 protein bites and get an entire chunk of them. So my recommendation is that after you make them into balls, then put them on either a glass plate or a glass cutting board and flash freeze them for about an hour. That way they're already frozen when you put them in here and they won't stick together. Awesome. Another baked item that I was making yesterday, and I think these turned out really, really well, is these homemade granola bars. They were made with strawberries and oats and a little bit of flour and honey. And I sent these to the school actually with the kids. Today was the first day that I tried them, and I will definitely be doubling the recipe next time because I think it turned out really well. So what I did with these is I did not flash freeze these. I simply allowed the granola bars to cool down, and then I cut them into size, and then I covered each one with plastic wrap. Now, I could put this plastic wrap in my freezer, but it would probably get freezer burn. So I'm protecting it in a Tupperware, which also serves as an easy way of getting it in and out of my freezer. So 2 different options, either flash freeze and put it in one container or individually wrapped, whatever suits you. And often it just depends on the item and how you'll be using it. I know for certain that those peanut butter balls are probably gonna be like a morning breakfast or a snack on the go. But I know that the granola bars will definitely be like packed in school lunches and packed in our backpacks for skiing. So I'm going to wrap them anyways, so why not wrap them now? All right, what else? Ooh, I love making homemade bread. It takes a long time, but I love having it on hand. So yesterday I made a couple loaves of homemade bread, and I just covered them in plastic wrap. These thaw pretty quickly and freeze really, really well. And I was really worried because it takes me about 3 hours to do a double rise and to cook the bread the way I like it. And I was very, very pleased when I started to do that, and now I do it all the time. What else? Oh, one of my favorites. I got a Belgian waffle maker, and I learned this from my mom that I can actually freeze the Belgian waffles. Now there's 2 ways of doing this, okay? As you can see, I'm using one of those like massive Ziploc bags. I guess it's a hefty bag, whatever. And I made blueberry and cinnamon and regular waffles, and we just pull these out, throw them in the toaster oven. But here's something to think about. If I were to make these waffles, even allowing them to cool and simply putting them in this plastic bag, they would freeze together and it would be really difficult to get them apart. So you can either flash freeze them, which is what I did. I put them on a little glass plate, froze them for about an hour, and then I could just throw them in here. Or if you're low on time, and I do this all the time, just wrap each waffle in a piece of wax paper, and that way there's space between the waffles so they won't stick together. So one of my favorite things to do are to make sliders, homemade sliders. I love to go to Costco and grab their grass-fed organic meat, and I usually take about 3 pounds of meat, and that meat can cover this massive baking tray. This guy is my best friend. It doesn't look pretty, but it works awesome. Anyways, so I actually put all the meat, I press it into my tray, and I can totally season it as I wish. I'll share a recipe in the comments so you can see what I do with mine. But long story short, after baking, I just take a pizza cutter and cut the hamburg into whatever portion size that I prefer. Usually whatever portion size matches the bread I'm going to use. So, for example, I have my sliders here, and I like to use the Hawaiian rolls because that's my kiddos and my husband's favorite. And let me show you what I use wax paper for. I think this is really, really important for maintaining the final product of the food that you're cooking. So I use wax paper to intertwine between each layer of my slider. Let me look down, okay? The cheese and the bread of choice usually cooks in about half the time as your protein. My protein typically, here's my meat in between the wax paper. So my protein usually takes about a minute 30 to reheat, but the bread only takes about half that amount of time, and I don't want dried out yucky bread. So that's why it's so important to use a piece of wax paper. Look at how thin this wax paper is. I'm not using a lot, but I'm just going to layer a piece of wax paper, and then my protein, layer back the wax paper, and my cheese, layer back the wax paper, and my bun, and then I can put it into my Ziploc bag and zip it up. I also would admit I like to put these into 2 sliders per Ziploc bag, and then I put these Ziploc bags in another bag. I just think it really helps prevent freezer burn. All right, so for our breakfast sandwiches, I've used both bagels and English muffins. They both work great. My one recommendation is when you buy a bag of either bagels or English muffins, that you first pull out each bread, cut it in half, and then you can put it in the freezer. It's too hard to thaw and then try to cut. The next thing I do is I use a massive Ziploc bag here for the eggs. Now I make my scrambled egg sandwiches, my breakfast sandwiches, identical to how I make my sliders. So again, I use my handy dandy sheet pan. This gets me about 18 eggs worth to bake on there. Now, if you prefer, as you're cooking your eggs, I love to use my KitchenAid little hand mixer because I think it whips up everything really nicely to scramble the eggs. I could throw in onions, peppers, ham chunks, whatever. This time I just made plain egg sandwiches. And so after they're done baking, identical to the sliders, I just use my pizza cutter and cut them into the same shape as the bread choice that I'm going to use. But it's so important to wrap this in wax paper because, especially with the eggs, my egg, and I topped it with a little piece of lunch meat ham, this is going to take about 1:45 to reheat. But my bread is only going to take half that amount of time. And I have tried it out. The bread works really well in the toaster oven, and it works just as well in the microwave. But again, only half the time as it would take for your protein source. So if you would like to put these in individual bags instead of, for me, the massive bag, you can totally do that exactly like we did the sliders. Layer wax paper, English muffin, wax paper, egg, wax paper, English muffin, put it in a Ziploc bag, you're good to go. But I cannot tell you enough how important the wax paper is so that your bread source does not stick to your protein source and create one massive chunk. It's just not going to turn out that well. And I think that it's important if you're bulk cooking and pulling things out of the freezer that it deserves to taste good. It doesn't deserve to taste like, ooh, this came from the freezer. So just want to hit on 3 or 4 more things that I love to freeze. Often I will make applesauce in my Instapot and can that, but this time I only had enough apples to make like 1 or 2 containers. And like I mentioned in part 1, I think it's absolutely essential to portion out what you're going to eat before it goes bad. Or if you're a family like mine that doesn't love leftovers, don't make a massive casserole dish that you'd only eat half of that night. Put it into a container the size of what you're going to eat before it goes bad, okay? I will admit, I love these little lids from Walmart. I will find a link and put them in the bottom because it's not metal touching on your food. Again, I've got my handy dandy little label there, which is so key because can you tell, is that broth or applesauce? Label. It's important. Another important thing is that you can freeze rice. So I usually make a gallon Ziploc bag of rice, and this is something that you don't have to portion out. As long as you lay it flat, then you can break off chunks of rice and reheat them as you need it. I'm down to like the last chunk and we're having tacos tonight. So I'm glad I pulled this out of the freezer, but it will not work if you just do like a bag of rice without flattening out. You won't be able to break off chunks. But I think this is a great thing to know that you can totally freeze rice. Even though we're talking about cooking in bulk, you do not have to cook everything yourself. There are things that you can purchase in bulk, simply separate out and freeze. One thing is cheese. Cheese freeze is really great, especially a shredded kind. I used to buy the big bags at Costco and then put them into little sandwich bags worth of cheese separate. Something I learned this week, you can freeze guacamole. So I bought a 3-pack of these at Costco and I'm super excited to try that out. Something else is we've been talking a little bit about making sure that whatever you are freezing or portioning out is something that you're going to consume before it goes bad. This is a great example. I bought this massive thing of lunch meat. We don't eat a lot of lunch meat. So what I did was I portioned it into 3 different portions. I froze 2 and left 1 in our refrigerator. You know, sometimes I buy in bulk and I feel like I'm constantly eating the same thing because it was on sale. This helps get rid of the boredom. I don't have to thaw these for another month if I don't want to. So I think that's awesome that we can have lunch meat this week and then we may not have it till next month. And I will say I've been freezing lunch meat for years. It turns out perfect. You will not be able to tell the difference between a frozen and thawed piece of lunch meat versus something that you purchased at the store this week. So I think this is definitely a big hit. And then the last one I'm going to hit on today is I bought all these little individual hummuses. It's ski season and hiking season, and so we have a lot of on-the-go moments. And so I'm very excited to just be able to take hummus with me on the go. So again, there's some things that you don't even have to make that you can freeze in bulk, or sometimes you buy something like cheese, portion it out into portions that your family will use and freeze. Or there are other things that you can make homemade, like our awesome sliders. So I hope you gained a lot of really cool tips and tricks about what you can freeze and how to preserve the food that you're freezing. And I will see you soon.